Hey guys, welcome into my channel. Today I want to do a ranking of all of my powder bronzers. I have already done a ranking of all of my powder blushes and my cream and liquid blushes. So if you're interested in that, I will try and link them up in the cards. But also I have created a playlist for all of my ranking videos, so check those out if you're interested. I do have 27 bronzers here that I'm going to rank, and I'm going to start from worst and work my way all the way to my top bronzer. I've done this in every single video, but I usually put them into categories. I put the bottom third, then the middle, and then the top third. Like the ones at the bottom just aren't my favorite. They're ones that I just don't grab for that much. Those that are in the middle are okay, but they usually have like one or two issues that just prevent them from really being the best. Usually that's a shade thing. And then the top ones are the ones that I always reach for. I love them. They all seem to kind of do something unique in my collection, whether it's like their luminosity is just really great, or like it's a really neutral tone, something along those lines. And so that's why they make it into the top third. So let's jump right into it. I'm gonna start off with number 27. The last place comes the blush and bronzer duo from Jaclyn Cosmetics. This is actually called the Bronze and Blushing Duo, and I believe you can still get this. I think that it's in her normal line. This is one of the lighter like color stories that she has for these duos. This one is in Top Tan and the blush is in Lilac Love, if you're curious about that one. This is not a bad bronzer per se. It's just a really, really light color, and I don't think it shows up on my skin very well. The formula is really, really nice. It's very soft. It almost feels like a bake formula. It has a really satin finish to it, just very buttery. I think it's more of a shade thing, that it's just very, very light, and so it doesn't show up on my skin tone, and so I just don't find myself reaching for this. Coming in at number 26 is a bronzer from Iconic London. This is called the Ultimate Bronzing Powder, and this one is in the shade Medium Bronze. I don't think this is a bad bronzer in terms of texture or finish or anything like that, but I don't think it's a standout bronzer either. It's just a powder bronzer. It feels like a pretty matte finish, no real sheen to it or anything like that, just kind of that matte finish. But this particular shade, because it's in medium bronze, is just a little bit too dark for me. I don't think it's too warm. I just think that the color is a little bit too dark, and it's just not a standout bronzer in my collection. There are some here that match in color. Like there are bronzers that I have that I really like that are a little bit darker, that I ranked a little bit higher because there's something else about them that I really like. For example, maybe it's just a really, really natural sheen and it's just a really beautiful finish. And so I do really like those, so I'll move them up higher in the ranking. But this one just kind of, it's just an okay bronzer. Like it doesn't have an outstanding finish or formula. And because it's the medium bronze, it's just not one I reach for because it's a little bit dark for my skin tone. I did get sent this in a BoxyCharm, so they tend to send me, when they send me like bronzers, the shade in the middle and not the fairest shade. So that's not the bronzer's fault, but the formula itself is just okay. So coming in at number 25 is the No Limits Matte Bronzer from LYS. I actually like the color of this one. I think that it's a pretty neutral tone, but this is my only powder bronzer that I have in my collection that for whatever reason winds up patchy on my skin. I think it's a pretty soft formula. I do like matte bronzers, but I get a lot of patchiness, and I don't know if that's just because it's an overly powdery formula, but I have tried applying it with different brushes. I even have one of the LYS powder brushes that I've used to try and apply this with, and it still comes out patchy. I don't know if you can kind of see that on the swatch, but it kind of has like a lot of, see, it's almost even patchy now. Like it kind of has a lot of like extra powder to it, and so when you're kind of applying it, it's just not the smoothest, and I don't know why that is. Otherwise it seems like a really good formula, and I don't have many powder products that really skip or look patchy on my skin in terms of like the base products, bronzers and blushes, but for whatever reason this one does. I've kept it in my collection because I think I want it to work for me, but no matter what brush I use, it always winds up patchy on my skin, so that's why it's in at number 25. All right, coming in at number 24 is the Light to Medium Bronzer Duo from Jouer. This one is like a really good formula. It's just, again, just a shade thing. The duo in here is meant for light to medium, but I almost feel like this is, again, another one that's just too light. This one over here barely shows up on my skin, and then this one over here, for whatever reason, is just a very, very light but warm shade. So it almost looks just basically orange with not a lot of neutral base to it. So I'll swatch both of these for you. So this one is the lightest shade, and again, it's just too light to really do much on my skin. And then this one right here, It doesn't necessarily look as like warm on my swatch, but when it's on my cheeks, because it's such a light color, I get a lot of undertone, and it's mostly just kind of an orange swipe. And so it doesn't really look very flattering on my skin. I've kept this around simply because I think this is a really popular product. One, I want to use it for comparisons, but also two, I kind of feel like I want it to work for me. That's just not the case. I just don't get that every single time with this. I think there's no issue with the formula. I think it's a nice satin to matte finish, no luminosity to it or anything like that. Applies fine without patchiness issues. It's simply just a shade thing. It's so interesting when comparing bronzers because some of the lightest shades in the range for that brand are so dark, and then some are just way too light. So I'm always interested, like, wow, that's what they consider their lightest, or that's what they decided to make for their lightest shade. And then other ones is like, wow, I'm a really fair-skinned person and that's still too light for me. So that's kind of the way that this one wound up for me. Again, not a bad formula, not a bad finish, just a shade thing. So coming in at number 23 is just a little mini, but it's the NARS Laguna Powder Bronzer. For the cream bronzers, a 01 and a 02, which is fabulous. If you don't know this and you love cream bronzers, NARS came out with a Laguna cream bronzer, and they came out with a tone 01 and 02. And the 01 works perfect for my fair skin, where this one in the powder formula, this is just a little bit too dark. And the reason that I've held on to this one, because it's an iconic bronzer, but also because the formula is really, really good. This just has a nice sheen to it. It's a very light and subtle sheen, and it just looks very natural, but it's so beautiful. So I can definitely see why this was a popular product, and I haven't wanted to get rid of it because I just try using a light hand so I can get the finish from it that I really like while still making it work for my fair skin. So the only reason that this is at number 23 is because of the shade thing. Again, just not a formula issue. Okay, coming in at number 22 is the Ultra Matte Powder Bronzer from Melt Cosmetics. This is a fairly recent launch. I believe that they had 4 shades that they came out with for this particular line, and this one was their lightest shade. This one is in the shade Santa Barbara. Initially, I did really like it, but when I'm comparing it to a lot of my other bronzers that just look really good on my skin tone, this is just a little bit too dark, and it has quite a bit of warmth. It's a really, really silky formula. It's really, really pigmented. It almost like stains the skin. It has so much pigmentation. So I really like the formula. Again, not a formula issue, just a shade thing. But if you see, there is so much warmth in the undertone, and it's quite deep for being their lightest shade in their line. So I can say, after using it for a little bit longer, that I actually prefer something that's a little bit less warm and a little bit lighter in color for my fair skin. So coming in at number 21 is the Instant Summer Powder Bronzer from Hard Candy. I have recently picked this up. This one is in the shade Toasted. This is a pretty light shade, and when it arrived, I looked at it and I thought, this is like pretty light. I wonder if this is actually going to work. It did. I don't think it's too light. I think it's definitely darker than the Jouer. I believe that it does show up on my skin. I just think that the Instant Summer part, like, it's definitely more orange than I really like to wear in my bronzers. I think that I like this particular bronzer when I'm actually working with more of an orange blush. Today I'm wearing more of a pink blush, but like, I get it. The Instant Summer part, I think that this is a really good bronzer for the months more of like, you know, spring and summer. I don't think this is necessarily a really good product to use in kind of like the fall and winter months when I'm going for something that's just a little bit more neutral. And I don't think it's a bad bronzer. I don't get any patchiness issues. It's called the Natural Powder Bronzer. So I do feel like it has just kind of this natural finish. I don't think there's anything outstanding about it, but I don't think it's bad. I think it's good. Again, it's just a shade thing for me and an undertone thing for me, that I think this is just a little bit too warm without having an actual tone to it. It's just a lot of orange. So coming in at number 20 is the Buxom Staycation Vibes Primer Infused Bronzer. The Primer Infused blush in the shade Seychelles from Buxom was ranked my top powder blush in my blush ranking video. I thought when I saw this that I would instantly love it, and I think that it has a very similar finish as the Primer Infused blushes. I think it has a little bit of a sheen to it. I'll show it to you here and kind of like turn it in the light, and you can see that sheen, and it's really beautiful. I quite like it in this bronzer, but I think the shade is just not good. Again, it's just a shade thing, not a formula thing. It's kind of hard pressed in this pan, so it is a little bit difficult to pick up, where I don't find that at all with the blushes. But once I do get it onto my skin, I love the sheen. It's just, again, very, very warm. So I do have to be careful which blush I pair this bronzer with. So again, not a formula thing. Actually really like the formula. A huge fan of the primer infused formulation, but it's just a shade thing. This one is in the shade Rooftop Tan. Coming in at number 19 is the Soft Radiance Bronzing Powder by GoWish by Huda Beauty. This one is a marbleized bronzer, and I thought that I would absolutely fall in love with it. And I think it's really pretty, and I think it has a pretty neutral tone in the brown part of the marbleization, but it's just kind of a really hard pressed formula. I do think that it has like a pretty nice sheen to it. Like once you actually get this swatch going, I can kind of show you. I think it's like a satin finish with just a slight sheen. It's really, really hard pressed in the pan. And so it doesn't pick up very easily on a brush, and it doesn't translate very well onto the skin very easily. So I have to work a little bit harder to pick this product up. It doesn't just come off very pigmented right away. And while that can be good sometimes to have a bronzer that's just buildable, I do find that this is just an okay product. There isn't anything that this does that some of my other bronzers don't do. Because it just doesn't give me the feeling of being extraordinary or doing something really stand out, it's just not a bronzer that I reach for very often. So that's why it did come in at number 19. Coming in at number 18 is the Milani Baked Bronzer. This is another one that I really, really thought that I would love because I absolutely love baked product blushes that Milani has. This one is in the shade Glow, so it does have very, very strong sheen to it. And the reason that I don't really love this, not that I don't love the formula, it's absolutely another shade thing, is that this just looks like a really orange highlighter. It's too glowy for me. I don't like something that glowy. I think that a slight sheen is really nice. This is a very, very warm tone, and so it kind of just looks like a really dark highlighter. I do like luminosity. I just think this is way too much luminosity. I do think that the baked formula for Milani is super pigmented and easy to work with. It is simply just, you know, overly glowy for me, too glowy. The shade is called Glow. It's in 04. Could be the reason that I just dislike this one and need to pick up a different shade. But for a bronzer, I just think that no matter what shade this was in, for me, it would just be too glowy on the finish and just not something that I would reach for on an everyday basis. So that's why it came in at number 18. Coming in at number 17 is the Bronzino Powder Bronzer from Gucci. I really think that this is a really good formulation. Absolutely love the Luminous Matte Formula blushes that just released. I think this is really, really beautiful on the skin. I think that it gives a slight sheen to it while still being matte. I would almost say that this is very similar to the formulation that they had in the blushes, and I think that it applies great. It has no patchiness issues, and it's quite pigmented. I did pick this up in a bad shade, however. This one is in the shade 02. And when I was purchasing this, when I saw the pictures online, I thought 01 looked too light. And so I said, well, maybe they just run fairly light for the line for Gucci. So let me pick up 02. It was a mistake. This is too deep of a shade for me. I don't think it's overly warm, and I think it's a beautiful, just satin finish is what I would call it. It's just too deep. That is entirely my fault. Again, love the finish. Just a shade thing for me. I think it's definitely worth the splurge. I think that the Gucci powder products so far, the new launches that I've tried, are absolutely worth it. I have no issues with their formulation. I think their packaging is solid and sturdy as compared to some other more luxury products that some of them just don't feel super sturdy. It does come with a little brush on the bottom and quite a big mirror. So I do really like this. Again, just a shade thing for me. If you had your eye on the Gucci bronzers and wanted to splurge a little bit and pick it up, I would definitely recommend. But if you're a fairer skin tone like me, I would say stay true to the line and just get it in 01. So coming in at number 16 is the Make Beauty, the name, Skin Mimetic Micro Suede Bronzer. This one's in the shade Lunar. Lunar is the lightest shade in their line. I really do like this formulation. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful like satin matte finish. I think it applies wonderfully. I think it almost airbrushes your skin because of the powder and just the way it feels. but I can say that I think that this is just too warm of a tone when it translates to the skin for being the lightest shade in their line. There are no issues again with formulation. It is again just a shade thing. Like I said, I think that this kind of just airbrushes your skin. It's just such a silky formula. I really, really like the way that it applies. I like the way that it feels on the skin. I think that it's a pretty long-lasting bronzer. Again, it's just a shade thing. Okay, we are now into the middle section of the bronzers, and I promise you, I'm probably done saying it's a shade thing from now on, because every one of these in the middle section are perfectly toned. Whether they look too dark in the pan or not, when they translate onto my cheeks for my fair skin, they actually look beautiful. They're not too warm, and I really quite enjoy them. These ones in the middle aren't my absolute favorite, but I still love them. I still think that they're all really tremendous bronzers, and they each do something that I can absolutely like pinpoint that they do well or differently. They just didn't make it into my top third because they're just not more reach for than the other ones. And I think you'll see why when I get to the top third of the bronzers. So coming in at number 15 is the Sunstruck Marbleized Bronzer from Believe Beauty. This one is in the shade Sun-Kissed Honey. I think the GoWish product should have been formulated like this, because I absolutely believe that this would have been just a knockout product had it been. This looks very deep in the pan, I will admit, but once you get it onto the skin, it's so beautiful. It's a super rich, super creamy formula, and it has this slight sheen to it. It's quite beautiful. So even though when I first got this and this was in the lightest shade, I was like, oh my goodness, this is gonna be way too dark for me. And then when I got it onto my cheeks, I was like, no, this is actually a pretty neutral tone when it translates to the skin. And I think the sheen is just gorgeous. And for being such an inexpensive product, it's really just a shock that the quality is so good on this. So again, if GoWish had done the formulation like this, it would have been fantastic. This one is 10 times better than the GoWish Marbleized Bronzer. If you have not tried this, this is another one that I would say you should run and get. Coming in at number 14 is the Colorful Contour from Sephora. This is technically not a bronzer, I understand that, but I use it as a bronzer because I don't typically sculpt and bronze. I will just do one or the other, and I think this actually can be used and still look really good if you're doing it in the same way. You're using this as a bronzer. Very gray toned, so it's quite a nice contour shade if you want to use it for that. I think that they did a really good job on the tone for being a contour, but again, this is something that I will use as a bronzer. I think that it still works perfectly. I think that it looks very good on the skin. I do have a mirror in here. I like that they're really compact. I think the formula is actually really nice. It's very soft, silky, satiny. It's quite pigmented, and it lasts a good amount of time on the skin. So I think this is a good one, and I think what separates it from the other ones in terms of like what it does is simply because it's a contour as opposed to it being just like a really standout formula. I think the formula is okay and nice. I don't think it's a standout formula. I just really like this because I think it can be used for both a bronzer and a contour. So coming in at number 13 is the Monochromatic Bronzer Duo with a matte and shimmer side by Cover FX. This one is in the shade Sun-Kissed Bronze. I think this is a beautiful, beautiful color. I don't have any other bronzer in my collection that has this concept where it has one side that's matte and one side that's a sheen to it. So I actually think that that's really nice. This is a really, really soft matte formula. It's very pigmented. It goes on like silk. It's very, very creamy. I think it has a pretty neutral tone, just a hint of warmth, but not too much. There is the shimmer side swatched. I know that I'm repeating myself here, but I have to say this again. I think that having a duo with a shimmery side and then a matte side I think is fantastic. I think that doing that for blush and bronzer products is actually quite nice. You can get the diversity. You have the ability to do it if you want to, or just use one side if you don't. So again, very neutral tone. You can see that real sheen to it. I think this is beautiful by itself, but I also think this is nice to lay on top of this. I think that the formula again is really good and just a little bit of warmth and not too much. So I think this is a really good product, and I know that I see some people talking about the monochromatic blush duos from Cover FX, but I don't see a lot of people talking about the duos for the bronzer. Coming in at number 12 is the Butter Donut Bronzer from Physicians Formula. This was a release that came out last year, and it had 4 bronzers in the collection, and it came in like a gift shop case, and it had like different variations of like desserts, and this one was the butter donut one. I didn't hold on to 2 of them because they just weren't the right shade, and the other 2 I did keep. This I kept as a bronzer, and there was one that had way too much warmth for me, so I moved it to my blushes. And I do think that it has the same great Physicians Formula It is just very creamy, very buttery, same great smell, Smells like a donut. It's just so very soft and silky. It has a good amount of pigmentation. I think this one is a little bit warm, and that was an issue that I had with the other two, like I said before I decluttered them. But I've also had issues with the Physicians Formula shades in the past. I had their very first launch of the Butter Believe It bronzers from Physicians Formula, and I had to declutter it because it was absolutely way too warm for me and it looked like orange stripes on my cheek. Whereas this one I think actually is a little bit more neutral than the tone of the one that I had picked up before that I had decluttered, and definitely more neutral than the other ones that came in this collection. So I held on to this one. It did have an overspray of like sprinkles on it because it's in the shade, or like, I don't know, story sprinkles or whatever, but most of them have like come off. So they didn't provide too much variation in the color. The other ones who had like a really thick pink center, so it changed the color quite entirely. This was one that just had a tiny bit of overspray. So I think that this is really good if you're a fan of the Physicians formula and their finish. It's just very creamy, very buttery. It's just a really nice formula. I think though that I'm finding other ones in my collection that I just like a little bit better than this one, because, you know, I have had my years with the Physicians formula, and there are just other ones that I find I think just perform a little bit better than those do. So there's nothing bad with that, and it did come in the 12th place. The next one is one that you cannot get anymore. It wasn't a limited edition, but it was a holiday release. And this one is the Amazonian Clay Cheek Wardrobe from Tarte. Tarte usually does come out with like holiday releases and does do some version of these Amazonian Clay Cheek Wardrobes. And typically they're just blushes, but in this case, this one was a blush, a bronzer, and a highlighter at the top. I'm just kind of showing you that one. The blush is here. I love this for travel, but I really liked this bronzer, so I didn't want to leave it out of the ranking. It does come in at number 11, even though it's not something that you can get your hands on anymore, and it's a little bit of an older product. This is coming on 3 years old, but it still performs really well. I'm not a huge fan of the Amazonian Clay formula overall. The blushes are not my favorite. The ones that I did have in my collection, I did declutter, but I think this bronzer is beautiful. It has a little bit of a sheen to it. It's just a really neutral tone, maybe a slight hint of warmth, but it's not overly warm. I do like that really natural sheen that it gives. I think it's quite pigmented. It lasts on the cheeks a really long time. No patchiness issues. It's the bronzer that I traveled with when I was gone for 3 weeks this year. I brought this trio with me. I wasn't disappointed. I loved using this every single day. I do know that Tarte usually comes out with these every holiday, but this year I did not see them release them in their holiday collection. But that's not to say you can't get your hands on these in other ways, and maybe they'll come out with another variation of this maybe next holiday season. So I love this one. If they come out with it again and I need to replace my products because they've just gotten too old, I would definitely consider getting another one of these. Coming in at number 10 is a bronzer from Nabla. I am gonna have to read this one. It's the Skin Bronzing Sun-Kissed Effect Bronzing Powder, and this one's in the shade Ambra. I think Nabla has great powder products. I think their bronzers and their blushes are fantastic. Now, this is a powder product and not a baked formula, but it almost looks baked. It's not quite as soft and like malleable as a baked product. It's absolutely a really soft and really creamy formula, even being a powder product. It's another one that has a pretty good neutral tone with a very slight hint of warmth. You get a very slight sheen to it. It's such a slight sheen that it's just very sophisticated. It's not like overpowering. There are no shimmers in it. Overall, I just think it's like a really good bronzer, manufactured in fine Italia. So I am a fan of this one. It did come in at number 10. Coming in at number 9 is the Silky Matte Bronzing Powder from Milani. This one is in the shade Sunlight. I think that this is a great matte formula. I think Milani kills it with their powder products. This is kind of a harder pressed formula. I know that it picks up quite well on a brush. I don't have any issues applying it. It's a pretty neutral tone. It has a slight bit of warmth to it, but it's like the perfect shade for my skin. It's not overly dark. It's not too light. It's not too warm. It's like perfect. And I love me a matte bronzer once in a while. I just think it's a really good one if you want an everyday matte bronzer. I think 100% if I was gonna recommend, give me a matte powder bronzer, I would think of the Milani one every single time. So it's really good, no shimmers, very matte, very silky. It's a little bit more hard pressed, but really good formulation. Okay, so that rounded out the middle section of all of the bronzers, and I'm absolutely not surprised that I did this, but I entirely miscounted. We are not at number 8. We are at number 9 because I am counting the last ones of the ones that I have in my collection. And I know in my mind where they ranked, I might have just misplaced one and then miscounted, which totally sucks. But nevertheless, we are at 9 bronzers left. Again, these are my top ones. So let's get into these ones. I see it now. I think the little tiny NARS mini fell, and so I counted 27 instead of 28, so that sucks. But anyway, so coming in at number 9 is the new launch from L'Oreal. This is the Infallible 24-Hour Fresh Wear Bronzer in the shade Fair. This bronzer is really good because it's very, very neutral and it's a very hassle-free product. It has good pigmentation. It's a soft matte finish, very silky when it applies. It's very silky in the pan, and it's waterproof. That's one of the reasons that this one ranks a little bit higher for me, is because it's one of the only waterproof bronzers in my collection. And I really like that here in Florida because I sweat a lot. It's very known that it's very humid here. And a lot of times my makeup will start to slip off or break apart throughout the day because it is a more moist climate. So for that reason, I really, really love it. I think that it performs very similarly to the Milani one that I just went over, but I think that this one is a softer formula. I did mention that the Milani is a little bit more hard pressed, where this isn't. It's very silky in the pan, very easy to pick up. I think the shade is very similar, but I think the finish is just different. This is the soft matte, a little bit more silky. That's absolutely more matte and more hard pressed, but love that it's waterproof. This is a really, really good one from L'Oreal. Coming in at number 8 is the Blush Slash Bronzer from the Balm. This is such a unique bronzer in my collection because it is toned so differently than any of my other bronzers. It has almost a red undertone to it, and that is because it's a hybrid product. It is designed to be a bronzer and a blush. I don't use it as a blush, I use it just as a bronzer because I think it's a little bit too dark for my preferences for a blush. But as you can see, it just has like a hint of red in the undertone, and so it almost makes it usable as a contour. It's just a very, very unique shade in my collection, and I absolutely love the formula. I think the formula is soft. I think that it picks up on a brush very easily, deposits a lot of product onto the cheeks, nice and pigmented. But what makes it really, really stand out is just that hint of like that red undertone, and it translates onto the skin so beautifully. I have heard that the Balm products can tend to get a little bit hard panned, and so they become a little bit more finicky and you have to work with them a little bit harder. I haven't actually found that with this particular product yet, and I have had this, I believe, for about 2 years now. It still performs wonderfully, and I just think that that slight reddish undertone makes this bronzer stand out from other bronzers. I'm a huge fan of this. I hope that it doesn't go away in their line, because when I run out of this product, I would definitely repurchase this. Coming in at number 7 is the SoftSculpt Transforming Skin Perfector from Makeup by Mario. This is the Radiant Skin Powder is what it's called. This one is in the shade Light. I never saw what Mario did with this particular product on his tutorial when he launched this, and so I don't necessarily know that he used this specifically for a bronzer, but that is how I use this product. It was shaded more with a gradient and lighter, you know, middle warmth, and then a more neutral shade here. But I just mix these all together to get like a really, really good bronzer shade. And I cannot explain why this bronzer works the way it does, but it looks so absolutely natural on the skin. It actually makes me look like the sun has hit my cheeks. It looks like I didn't put anything on. I think this is a bronzer that you could use, just give your cheeks that really sun-kissed look if you weren't wearing any other makeup. And this is the only bronzer that I have like that in my collection. There is nothing I have that is as natural as this product. And it's quite possibly because it wasn't designed to be a bronzer, but I think that there are a lot of people out there that are actually using this product that way. And it's just such a like very, very perfect tone for fair skin to use as a bronzer. It has a tiny bit of warmth. It's just light enough. It's just dark enough. If I dipped into this side a little bit more, I could make it a little bit darker of a color. But yeah, it's just that really, really natural look on the skin that makes this such a good product. I don't have anything else like it, so that's why it came in at number 7. The next bronzer that comes in at number 6, you cannot get your hands on anymore at a retail store or like a brick and mortar store. This one is the Tantastic Omega Bronzer from Marc Jacobs. This is obviously like their travel size. I will get like a travel size or a mini size and things if I can pick them up, because I think that testing out a product for the first time in a travel or mini size is actually quite nice, because there are a lot of times it's just product that I'm not going to get through, and if I don't like it, I have this a lot of product that you know, I can't do anything with. This one is just a spectacular product, and not just because of the formulation, but because of the tone. And I describe this tone as a camel tone. It's you all know where that was going. So no, I think the tone on this is fantastic. I think it's a really neutral tone, but I think the shade is very like camel colored. It's just very natural and neutral. It's a really, really soft, silky formula, but it's pigmented. It looks great on the skin. It applies like almost airbrushed. It just seems to buff out a lot of the imperfections or the texture that's on my cheeks because it's so silky, that I'm so sad that they don't make this anymore. I think that this was such a good product, and the tone was so, so beautiful. So airbrush, really, really silky finish to it just makes it stand out. I think it was really good. And yeah, I don't know. Again, sad that Marc Jacobs Beauty is no longer doing their thing, because I think a lot of their products were actually really nice. Okay, we are down to the top 5. Coming in at number 5 is the Milk Chocolate Bronzer from Too Faced. This one is in the shade Soleil. This bronzer I've had in my collection pretty long. I think it's one of my longest like retained bronzers that I've had. I think I purchased this pretty early in my makeup buying obsession. This still performs like a lot of my new bronzers. It's still super silky, super soft. It's about as soft as like the Tantastic one. I would say that that one's actually like even a little bit softer than this one, but this again, very creamy, just satin matte finish. Has a really beautiful like milk chocolate. It literally smells like hot chocolate. It smells delightful. So it's quite nice for that reason, but I think it's a pretty good neutral tone, just a soft matte. It's one, again, that I think kind of makes my imperfections or the texture on my cheeks look airbrushed, really long lasting. I don't think I have very many Too Faced products in my collection, but this one I would repurchase for sure. Coming in at number 4 is the Fido Touch Sun Glow Bronzing Gel Powder from Sicily. This is a very, very expensive brand. It's a very expensive product. I think it's way overpriced for what it is. I get that. It's a luxury brand for sure. I do not encourage you to run out and purchase this, but I do quite enjoy it. I like the formulation. I like the shade for me, but I think the shade is only good for fair, light, and potentially medium skin tones. This is just a really, really luminous, very sheen-like product. It is a baked gel formula, but that sheen is just so gorgeous. It gives such a flushed look on your cheeks. It's a product that I don't really have anything else like this in my collection. It is the most expensive, I think, makeup product that I have in my collection. And I wouldn't say, again, don't run out and buy this if you weren't thinking about it, but I do think that it is a really good formulation. I think the shade for someone who's of a lighter complexion really works. And if you saw like that imprint and that sheen, you could tell it's a very like shimmery or sheeny product that just really translates onto the skin very nicely. And again, it just being that baked gelée formula is the only bronzer that I have like that in my collection. So because it's unique in that way, it does stand out in my collection. I hate to say this, but this is another bronzer that you can no longer get. This is the Sunlit bronzer from BECCA, coming in at number 3. This one is in the shade Bali Sands. I saw someone on YouTube talking about this right before BECCA was about to close their doors for good. So this had to have been 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago at this point. And I wanted to give this a shot because someone said that they were really sorry to see this product go because it was one of their holy grails. I did pick this up in Ulta. It is a very, very creamy formula, but it's just a really, really great neutral tone. It has like a very, very slight sheen to it, a very, very like satin finish, if you can kind of see that sheen. It's just beautiful. Again, it's just one of those that applies to the cheeks and just looks really airbrushed. You get that sun-kissed look. That really does it. The formulation on these, aside from looking really flushed and airbrushed on your cheeks and just having a good tone, like some of them just do it so well. Aside from describing it that way, I don't know how else to say why they perform so good. But this one is a fantastic product. This is one of those from BECCA, and one of the reasons that it's just a shame they didn't give more products to Smashbox to continue selling, because I think that this one would have been a good one had they kept in their line. And if you didn't know what I meant by that, Smashbox took over their Champagne Pop highlighter, and they also took, I believe, the rights to the corrector that BECCA sells. There are a couple of other BECCA products that, like this one, that I could have seen go and still give them success in carrying. So I'm sorry Smashbox didn't choose to continue to carry this one. That's what I meant. Coming in at number 2 is the Heatwave Luminous Bronzer from Flower Beauty. This is such a great formulation for the drugstore. I think there are some things that Flower Beauty does that are absolutely fantastic. This bronzer being one of them. It is a baked formula, and like it says, it's a Heatwave Luminous Bronzer. This does only come in 2 shades, but the 2 shades that they're in have a really red undertone. Then the darker shade has an even more reddish undertone. So I get why she called them Heatwave, but yeah, that luminosity, that sheen to it is very, very slight. It looks very sophisticated. Again, it's such a creamy, silky formula that it looks airbrushed on my cheeks. I love this tone. I think that I find that I'm a fan of bronzers that have a little bit of red in their undertone as opposed to just orange to give them warmth, and this one does that very similarly to the one from the Balm because it's designed to be a bronzer and a blush, and I think the Flower Beauty product does that. I think that this is just such a all-around standout product. It's fairly inexpensive. You get a lot of product in here, and it stands out in the market with a ton of other bronzers. It's the grand finale time. We are down to number 1. At number 1 is the L'Oreal True Match Lumi Bronze It. This product is very, very unique in my collection. This one is designed to be for face and body, and so for that reason, they give a very light, very natural looking sheen slash shimmer to it. It is one of the softest formulas that I have in my collection. It is such a neutral undertone, and it's such a perfect shade for someone with like fair to light skin tone, and this one is in the shade light, so they do have darker shades in this line. One of those that just makes your face look super airbrushed. It gives such a slight sheen to it that it's gorgeous for like that sun-kissed look on your cheeks. If you wanted to use it along your collarbones, I just think it would look beautiful. It's not something that I would put on my body. It's just not something that I do, but I actually think that this would look really nice for it to maybe even like give your legs a little bit of a shimmer. I think this is a beautiful, beautiful product. Again, the formula is the creamiest one out of all of these when you touch it. It is a most sophisticated looking natural shimmer. It's a really, really good tone on the skin. I think this is a standout product, and it came in at number 1. I would always repurchase this. I hope this doesn't leave their line for some time, but because it is designed for face and body, you do get a little bit more product in this bronzer. So I do believe this will last me a long time. I love it. And that was all 28 of my powder bronzers. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'd love to hear from you on the bronzers that you love in my collection that you've tried, or some that I didn't include in today's video. There are a ton out there. I'd love to hear your recommendations. I hope you like this video. If you're not currently subscribed, I hope you consider subscribing to my channel. Turn on the notifications bell so you're notified of my future uploads. And if you do subscribe, I will catch you in my next video. Thanks guys, bye.